We see it with the transgenderism ideology, apparently encouraging people to mutilate themselves because they believe they were born in the wrong body or they believe they're actually the opposite sex is morally right.
One of the things that I really like about liberalism is that primarily it seems to want to allow people the freedom to reasonably live the way that they want to live. This differs starkly from modern conservatives because they seem to want this freedom for themselves, but they also want to force their lifestyle on everybody else. It's essentially their way or the highway. Conservatives often perceive protecting the rights of everybody as forcing them to do things that they just don't want to do. And what they want to do is to continue to oppress certain minority groups as well as force their will on the wider population. So sometimes conservatives are literally forced to do something they don't want to do, like serve the black couple in their restaurant or allow the gay couple to purchase a wedding cake. And then what they'll do is they'll conflate literally being forced to treat everybody equally with inconsequential things, at least inconsequential to them. Like, for instance, drag queens and trans people simply existing. That doesn't affect them in any kind of way. And Gothix's rant here about trans people is an instance of the latter. Now, there are some outliers out there that try to force individuals into becoming trans, but it would be a composition fallacy to then claim that these outliers set the tone for liberals as a whole. And I just want to stop real quick. None of this has anything to do with atheism. I don't know why this is titled about the dangers of atheism or anything, but so far, like, other than at the very beginning where she talks about atheism, nothing else has really been concerned with atheism. This is a total shit show of a video, but I'm here to refute all of it. Back to the issue of people being forced to become trans. There are outliers out there, like the fuckhead that runs the Twin Flames cult. He has forced people to become trans, and he's successfully convinced people to become trans even though they weren't trans before. And that is wrong. That's why I called him a fuckhead. The actual process that someone goes through when they are considering transitioning is a much more complicated and calculated action. They speak to a wide range of professionals, including counselors, psychologists, doctors, and they speak to them about what is the best regimen for them. Now, I'm not trying to portray myself as some kind of expert on this process or anything like that. There are a lot of great creators in this space to talk to you about those things and explain those things to you. There's even a call-in show on the line. Y'all know I'm on the line sometimes. There's actually a show where you can actually talk to a trans person. But what I do know about this process is that it's not bodily mutilation and decisions are not just made on a whim. I do think that it's morally right to allow someone to freely live as long as it doesn't infringe on the rights, freedoms, and well-being of other individuals. So, sex and gender identity are very complicated topics. And if someone happens to identify as a different gender, then they are not violating anyone's rights, freedoms, or well-being. So yes, it is morally right and okay for trans people to fucking exist.
The same can be said about exposing a child to sexually explicit material, including a drag show, a pride parade. Teaching them how to pleasure themselves, because apparently that's a curriculum that kids really need to know in school.
I don't know of any curriculum that is specifically teaching kids to pleasure themselves. I have seen some materials that have been generated in order to help explain to children certain feelings they might be having and to teach them about their bodies. There was this incident in 2017 where a parent got extremely angry over the fact that their child was in a sex education class where some sexual acts were talked about, like just listed. They were in a comma-separated list. But this course that she's so extremely angry about is actually generated by a faith-based pregnancy crisis center, which is a clusterfuck of a topic all on its own. And if you want to know more about pregnancy crisis centers, why they're bullshit, I'd suggest you watch this John Oliver bit.
But tonight, we're going to focus on the exact opposite of an abortion clinic, something called a crisis pregnancy center. Facilities whose primary purpose is to talk women out of terminating a pregnancy, something they don't often make that clear.
And this curriculum that this parent was upset over really just listed off these things as stuff that exists. And my opinion on this topic in general is that knowledge is power. I think it would be best if we could educate kids about sex as early as reasonably possible and by professionals. This will only help protect kids from being sexually exploited as well as from making poor decisions later in life. I feel like conservatives want to keep kids in the dark about sex education for as long as possible, and it's due to this sex phobia that's deeply ingrained in Judeo-Christian principles. And this will only hurt kids, as it has been shown to in the past. And the fact that there are literally kids out there that think that you can get pregnant from a toilet seat is evidence of this. Hiding this information from kids only leaves them open to being sexually exploited. And due to the stigma that conservatives place on sex, kids are less likely to inform proper authorities or the proper individuals about this exploitation. Of course, all of this makes sense in the conservative space when you have people like Matt Gaetz in public office. And he's only just now being investigated for the sexual exploitation of minors. And this is after the Justice Department refused to charge Matt Gaetz in their sex trafficking investigation. And then, of course, you have the several times in several conservative states that the conservative lawmakers have repeatedly affirmed the right to marry children. It seems like conservatives want to keep kids in the dark about sex education because that makes them inherently easily exploitable. And liberals are only a problem in this area of educating children on sex because we actually want to protect children from being sexually exploited. And that hurts the conservative agenda. Apparently. Also, in this section, she kind of leaves the term sexually explicit a bit vague and open to interpretation. She does mention drag shows, but for the most part, those are not sexually explicit. And if they are, or they happen to be, then they would be restricted to adults only. And of course, Gothics, being a Christian, she would find things to be too sexually explicit that aren't actually sexually explicit, like showing shoulders and blaming women for the perverse thoughts of men. In fact, conservatives like Gothics are the ones that are forcing the sexually explicit nature on drag shows. And of course, this harkens back to what we've been talking about this entire time. Conservatives wanting to force their will on the wider public, forcing the wider public to conform to their conservative ideals, because only their conservative ideals are the right ideals. I mean, it's literally all about control to them. That's all that they care about.
Who's to say these concepts aren't morally good? If we're setting the standards on our own, then this is what we end up with. The same can be said about rapists, thieves, murderers. They're setting their own standards, right?
Like I laid out in this video, conservatives, they set their own moral standards as well. It's just as subjective as she's claiming that our moral standards are subjective. There has never been an absolute set of moral standards, not even in Christianity. And the moral foundations of Judeo-Christian principles have changed several times over the ages. The moral foundation of Judeo-Christian principles has definitely changed, especially since the founding of the United States of America, but also since the inception of Judaism itself. Conservatives choose whatever set of moral principles helps advance whatever cause they are working towards. If that's installing a fascist Oompa Loompa, then rape, infidelity, and lying are morally fine. Again, conservatives don't care about what is morally good. They only seem to care about what will help their agenda. So Gothics implying that subjectively defining your morals makes it impossible for you to objectively condemn certain actions is bogus. If that were the case, then she would be in no better position to condemn these actions than we are. The big difference in this morality discussion is that she's being told what she should think by somebody else, whether that be God or the fuck that's reading the Bible and telling her what to think, while more liberally minded people have enough sense to figure this shit out themselves.